my friends, and welcome to PostScript. It's so nice to have you with us. It's a balmy, beautiful fall day here in the mountains of West Virginia. And today we have an interview with Frank Jacob, and we're very much looking forward to this. Frank is a filmmaker and man with lots of other kind of credentials, and who has really accomplished some very significant things in particular areas that we're going to talk a bit about today. Frank, it's so nice to have you with us. Thanks for being on PostScript.
Thanks for having me, John. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and we're interested in talking to you for a lot of reasons, one of which is that you're going to be with us at Transition Talks here in Berkeley Springs in December. And that's going to be already, we've got people starting to sign up for that. We're getting good response. And so we're going to have a good group and we're going to have a good time. But let's talk a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do and all those kinds of kind of obligatory things.
Sure. Well, my origins were in Canada, and I've landed in Germany. And that has to do with the fact that my parents, my ancestors are Germans, and they, at some point, like a lot of Europeans, emigrated over to the New World, and that's where I came into the world. And in the very beginning, I was more centered around the arts in my life. I was very fascinated by what you could do in terms of communication on an artistic level, but I was also really interested in film. So, but at the time that I was going through my education, the idea of film school was pretty much unattainable, and especially in the area that I was located in, it wasn't, something that was accessible. So I always figured, well, I would sort of go into the musical arts, and it would expand from there. And that's kind of how it evolved. And I guess for me, early in my life, I had a time when I was, I think, 12 to 14, 15 years old, that I was introduced to some metaphysical concepts, due to the fact that I was also an athletic kid, and I was training with my sister's boyfriend, who was like 3, 4 years older than me. So he would be pulling me into areas that probably kids my age wouldn't have. So, and this is, I think, how I came across this kind of esoteric information, and it grabbed me from the start. So I was in this sort of dilemma in my life, like, how do I tie the arts with this esoteric knowledge and my love of moving pictures? And as I got older, I realized that really this is the most powerful way to communicate. I mean, to communicate visually with music, and then adding a layer of high potent information on top of it. So that kind of became the goal. I took a long roundabout way to get there.
So how did you end up in Germany? That was the best place to study, I guess, right?
Well, no, by the time I got to Germany, I had I was past the whole studying age. I mean, I guess you can always study. It's never too late, as they say. But I was at that time I was in the United States, and I was working on in an internet incubator. So I was really into high tech stuff. And then that whole bubble burst, the internet bubble, all those pink slip parties. I don't know if you remember, but at that time I was kind of feeling like it was just before, I think I remember, it was the year that George W. Bush was running for president. And I was like, okay, well, maybe,
It was
I had
1988. That was at
well,
the
was it no, it was
election.
90s, end of the 90s. It was the other
Okay,
George
well, this
Bush.
is that. Then there was his second.
Then it was the exactly. So it was at that point I was thinking, well, I had this ability, because of my parents, to actually come to Europe and get a passport, which was a huge advantage. And so I thought, well, at this point in my life, I'd done a lot, I'd explored a lot, and maybe this was the time to kind of reinvent myself in and explore my roots. And so I came over to Germany at the turn of the century, and sort of really just like started from scratch, and really had to kind of find my way back in and reinvent myself. And that's when I started to I actually had kind of gotten out of arts, but I got back into the arts, and I kept developing it to the point where I actually even developed something called live cinema, which is where you're able to, it's kind of like making films live, if you can imagine that. I guess it's kind of hard to,
Sure.
but if you can imagine, or you can create sort of film scenes in your mind, and then film pieces of a film, like scenes of a film, and then you're all live in front of an audience. And there was this particular software that had become available that allowed you to mix those things live on the spot, but also
Right.
bring in elements of a live audience and musical performances and information and text and stuff. And so I thought that was a very, very powerful when I did that. And it was so powerful. I was asked by the Doctors Without Borders to create an annual report for them based on this art form. And that brought me, actually, it was funny. They were so excited. They took me all the way to Carnegie Hall. So I probably was the first VJ ever to perform at Carnegie Hall, and with original music that I composed together with a cellist. And that kind of started this bridge between America
Right.
and Germany again. It reactivated it. And I could see where it was going. And I think that's kind of where it's turned into now. I started getting more back into filmmaking and back
Yeah. Well,
into moving
yeah.
pictures. And I started making longer format
Yeah,
documentary
you
films.
talk to us briefly about a couple of your films, so people get an idea about what you've done, because you've done some very interesting ones.
Sure. Well, I think the one that some people might know that actually has made its rounds around the world is called Solar Revolution, and it was a film that was based around a bestseller in Germany called Dieter Wirth. He's a biophysicist, and he explored the idea of consciousness being affected by the cosmos, in particular the sun, because there was at the time there was all this stuff about 2012 and the Maya were talking about the end of the calendars and this changeover and this change of
Right.
consciousness. So he took a scientific approach to it, and when we met, it was like, okay, well, I want to make this film, and could you make this film for us? And so at that time I just met with an American film partner, Tanya Maidenford, and we teamed up and we began this idea of taking consciousness raising material and making it entertaining and filmic. And so that project was kind of our first project where we took scientific information and made it very
Right.
cinematic and told a story and about this idea that we actually are connected to the cosmos and that our consciousness can be affected by what's going on in the
Right.
cosmos, and that maybe there is something to the idea that we were going to have this and what interested me on it in particular, this idea of an involuntary consciousness elevation that was
Right.
being stimulated from the outside. That's what really got my attention with Dieter Wirth's book. So I thought, here's a hope maybe after all, because looking at the way the world was developing, it was like, is everyone going to suddenly wake up? How is that supposed to work? So that was our first film. We really went deeply into that subject.
So that was all about the transition or the evolution or the ascension, or the call it what you'd like, right?
Absolutely. It was about how human consciousness was going to go through a quantum
Right.
evolutionary leap.
Yeah.
And it was written in the books of the
Yeah.
indigenous people, but was there science to it as well? And that was what it was all about.
Good. What were the other films that you did?
Then the one that actually preceded that, which we actually interrupted to finish Solar Revolution, was called Packing for Mars. And that one's a little bit kind of like I call him kind of like the little punk brother of Solar Revolution, because it's a little bit more avant-garde, because it actually follows the premise of a book somebody had put in my hand, I think 10 years earlier or so, that was called Alternative 3. It was written by this English Fleet Street journalist of very good reputation called Leslie Watkins.
Mm.
And the person who gave me that book was a highly respected naturopath and very intellectual person. And we used to get into these discussions. I used to go to his place to pick up supplies and seeds and things like that. And then one day he pulls out this book and he says, "This isn't fiction, this is fact," right? And it was all about this Mars colony. And I took it
Okay.
with me.
We don't have a lot of time, and I don't want to dig all the way down in that hole, because I
Right.
want people to come and come and hear about that, because you're going to talk about that. Because I want you to then say you've made a transition into understanding and talking about and articulating more, perhaps more so than anybody else on the planet, about this whole business of being able to literally have technology that'll look into the future. So talk to us about that quickly.
Well, yeah, and that was, I guess, on the tail end of Packing for Mars, because that film got into this sort of more esoteric avant-garde fringe science. And I was interested because I'd done this science film with Dieter to find out if there might be some science behind the ideas. And then, we ran into a lot of people claiming to be whistleblowers of a secret space program. And we heard about something called Looking Glass technology, in particular called Project Looking Glass, which enabled the people who are operating this technology to view time streams. And obviously someone who has access to that kind of technology would have great advantages if they could observe time streams in the near future and be able to know what is coming. And apparently, according to the whistleblower, exactly what took place. They would look at time streams. And I thought it was an interesting subject. I didn't really build it into the film we were working on. And it wasn't really until 10 years later, literally almost to the month, that that project, the Looking Glass technology, resurfaced. And it was talking about two particular timelines that these whistleblowers that were military insiders that had worked on this technology were revealing to the world, because they felt it was important to open source the information so that everybody knew what was coming and everybody could kind of prepare themselves for it on the one hand.
All right, so don't give it all away, but just what
I
are the
won't.
two timelines? Because it's a much bigger story and a far more interesting story, and we're going to talk about it in detail in December when you're with us, which, by the way, will be live streamed wherever anybody is. So what are the two timelines? Because we're futurists, right? At the Arlington Institute, we're interested in the future and kind of the mechanics of how that all works. And there are a whole lot of things that are arising that are explicitly analysis and other kind of channeled information or whatever you want to say that are talking about crossing timelines and the transition and the ability to jump from one to the other. Now, is that what you found out?
Well, I found out, first of all, that essentially there's something, every one of us has a timeline, our own personal timeline, right? So when you're talking about two particular timelines, it ruffles a lot of people's feathers that don't want to believe that there's just two timelines. They think it's infinite amount of timelines. But yes and no. And it's the way, what turns out is you kind of figure out that there's something called a consensus timeline. That's a timeline where the majority of people they go into resonance with it. In other words, they
Sure.
through their belief system, through what they watch and view, and how they interact with civilization, will gravitate toward and resonate with a particular stream of thought and a stream of technology.
Let me give you an angle on that, because this weekend here at the Arlington Institute at our transition talks, which is where you're going to be next month, but this month, our speaker is Mark Stavish, and he is talking about egregores. And egregores are these spiritual kind of fabric that hold together like-minded people, like in clubs or teams or religions or whatever. And that's exactly what you're talking about here.
That's really funny you say that, John. On my train back, I was at a conference last weekend. On my way back, I was given a book, and I was reading through this book all about the breakdown of language and how that affects society. And in one of those pages, it was talking about egregores. And I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about here. And it really is that. And it's about how, we actually individually affect timelines. And it depends on whether we are making that decision consciously. In other words, we're more in control of our thoughts and our ideas and our direction, or we're doing it more reactively. In other words, we're responding to what's coming at us, and we don't believe that maybe we have much influence on timelines, so we just kind of go with the flow, as they call it, right? Well, as it turns out, that these two timelines really are leading us toward the fullest realization of the concept of absolutely abdicating your sovereignty and moving toward a more technological society. And the other one is saying, no, the full expression of the human DNA and the human being has never been yet reached. This whole idea of a Garden of Eden, the sort of the original plan that we have in us, in our body, biohardware, which is designed to bring us toward a natural form of a timeline that's much more evolved than the one we're living in right now. And these two seem to be, they're crisscrossing, and they're coming to a showdown, you could say. Yeah. And a lot of interesting information is popping into the world now that is showing that these lines are about to, and I always believe this too, that there's going to be a point where you're going to have to make a decision. Like there's going to be a
Absolutely.
finality to it.
Absolutely. That's the key kind of takeaway from every one of the analysis that I have read about the converging timelines, which, by the way, some people say is next week, literally. Uh, and that you have to make a decision because afterwards, then they diverge and it gets very, very hard and at some point almost impossible to change your mind and jump off the uh, techno, uh,
The technocratic
technocratic,
world, right? Yeah.
technocratic world. Yeah, right. So, I mean,
Absolutely. And I think it's more important than ever to realize this because it never used to be so that technology was so far advanced that it could actually mean having to make a decision between synthetics and biology. And we've reached that point. We're very close to that is going to happen. You know, whether you want to believe in it or whether you don't want to believe in it, there are people that are maneuvering themselves into advantageous positions to be able to capitalize on this, you know, technocratic world, unbeknownst to most people. And the discussion about what is this technocratic world all about? What does it really mean ultimately for society? And what does it mean for humanity? These discussions are too far and few between, in my opinion. I think people are really taking this quite seriously because this is the most important, you could say, moment in the history
yeah,
of this version of humanity. Like let's leave Atlantis or Lemuria or
yeah,
previous like
yeah.
ancient civilizations out of it. But we've reached a point now where it really is coming down to that you know clip one way or the other, one or the other will prevail.
Well, and the indications of you, as you suggested, is that there's this inability to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't, and particularly on the technocratic kind of track. I was having a dinner conversation the other night, and I was told that the biggest kind of scam that not the biggest, but one of the major scams that are going on right now is that um, people are taking using getting snippets of your voice and they turn it into or your kid's voice for that matter, and then they turn it into a dialogue that mimics your voice, and they get on the phone and call your kid and say, I got a problem and I don't have my key, would you open the door, or whatever the thing is. And and you just know you don't know the difference. And so what they were proposing and suggesting is that you should have I forget what it was, an emergency code or emergency key with your family, so that in a conversation, if your family member was asking you to do something unusual, that you could ask them what the password or the code
Right,
word was or some other
right.
kind of. I
Like
mean,
an
and it's
analog password.
yeah, well, it's kind of crazy, and when you think about it, relative to where we've all been and how we've lived our lives, is that you're into this woo-woo space that just what's real is really hard to tell. And so, see, I think that this desirable track that we're on, and hopefully, and jumping it is on the way to 1,000 years of peace, which is also talked about a great deal in a lot of ancient literature and the Bible and religious literature.
Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, really, you know, you're touching on some interesting subjects there. Like, for one, just the idea of somebody speaking for 15 minutes now is enough to, on a video audio recording, for an AI to completely emulate you accurately without you being able to tell the difference. Maybe in person you could tell the difference, but since we've now grown accustomed to these kind of Zoom rooms and YouTube appearances, it's impossible to tell. And the other thing is that, you know, you're mentioning, you know, you're talking about how, like, yeah, what do you give somebody as a piece of material that shows them that you're the authentic version of you and not the fake version of you. And you know, this is by extension also ties in history, you know, which is another pet project, sort of pet subject of mine, because also history has been tampered with so much that, you know, we've been influenced and shaped. Our society's been shaped by the history we've been told is the true history. But
Yeah.
you know, we didn't maybe have the wide perspective that we do now, the quantity and quality of information we have now that, maybe 80 or 100 years ago, for us to make, a much more authentic picture of what is really going on in the world. And as a result, if we don't know those kinds of things, then we'll be making decisions in the present that are based on fictions, which are going to lead us further astray, right? If we're talking about timelines being something where you are in resonance with truth, okay, let's say truth is kind of the yardstick here, and we're trying to get to the truth of matters, then if you are fed information which isn't true, it's already corrupted your potential for pursuing a truthful timeline to a natural conclusion of the highest good, the highest possible, like biological version of it, for example. And if you're fooled, then you will make decisions that are compromised, and all these little compromises along the way are leading us to where we're in a world right now that is really chaotic. And these chaotic situations in the world, they're also cyclical. We talked about that in solar revolution. You can see, relative to solar patterns, very clearly the rise and fall of civilizations. It's uncanny. You can, and even stock market exchange trades, panics on the stock market and things like that, you can find a direct correlation to that as well. So this is all things that are affecting the way we make decisions. So the more accurate or truthful the information we have and unfiltered is, the better chances we are going to have to create a normal world, where if we don't, we have this chaos world. And then again, if I lean on science here, it's been shown that every time there's been a system change, a systemic change on a grand level, it's always preceded by an incredible amount of chaos before that new system comes into place.
Of course, yeah, it changes from one state to another one, and so the previous state has to kind of decompose, if you will, and then it recomposes itself around a new reality. And that's why, in part or greatly perhaps, we're seeing all the extraordinary chaos and uncertainty in this amazing kind of a shift that is happening. And here at the Arlington Institute, we're really interested in kind of betting on the come, trying to build an idea about what a new world should look like. Get out in front of here, designing it. We did a little session. We have a program here that we produced called Quartet, where Greg Braden and Penny Kelly, and you've been on it once, and Kingsley Dennis. But we had one last week where we talked about, should we be thinking about designing a new country? Because there are all these people who are talking about the collapse of the United States, and lots of and a bunch of other countries as well in the next, say, 5 years. And so you're confronted for the first time in history in some kind of an intelligent way of being able to say, wait a second, how do I plan for this? How do I design the next iteration of this kind of process such that it's, in the futures business, is called a normative scenario? It's the world that we'd like it to be, rather than the world that just kind of comes up, based upon who knows what.
Yeah, and the two things when you're talking about that come to mind is, on the one hand, like, how do people know even when the world that they're in is normal, when they've been so denormalized that they've become so distorted in their connection to their hearts and their connection to their wisdom and logic, that they can't even make a decision because they've never been given enough information to make an educated guess as to what really should, that world look like, right? The other thing is, you've got things going on like Dr. Michael Nails. That's something that I was recently exposed to. He's a neuroscientist, and he studies the hippocampus, and he's shown that the hippocampus has a very, very important and powerful function in the human brain to create index neurons, which create memory pictures and help us build a cognitive experience in our brains to reflect on our past and to make decisions on a much more powerful way, because we can correlate our previous stored experiences with the fresh ones. But he's found that the hippocampus in society it's not functioning correctly any longer. Wow. And this is scary. I mean, this is kind of scary stuff. So what fascinates me is to bind all of this diverse information together, science and fringe science and trends and kind of see, like, to help kind of create a picture for people to help them navigate, because really this is the most important thing, helping people navigate in this chaos. If we want to end up in a world with a reasonable amount of conscious and intelligent people, then it serves us to try and clear up as much of the garbage and misconceptions as possible before that shift happens, or the majority is going to go off the cliff. I mean, it's just
Absolutely. And not only do you have to clean everything out, but you've got to rise to the occasion, essentially. I mean, this is a proactive kind of process, it seems to me. And you can't just lay back and presume that the waves of energy will come over here and on
right.
Thursday on Thursday morning you're going to wake up and really feel good. This is about like getting engaged and being part of this kind of new human. I'm very interested, for example, in trying to manifest and how you learn how to manifest things, because that seems to be a central characteristic of the capabilities that this new human that comes out of this transition has. And so it's just a really fascinating kind of thing, and particularly so because many of us, I'm sure you do, feel like this is what your purpose is in life, and this is why you're here now, and that you've got kind of an important role to play.
Well, I think we have to each of us decide those things. And I tend to have replaced the word hope for action, because I just think to say, let's hope it works out is kind of a negative thing. It's like that means something's got to happen before it will actually, or it's out of your hands. It's like the white hats out there or something are going to make it happen. No, I think that we each of us need to come alive and activate and realize that we're each of us as souls here right now, incarnated in the earth in a very, very specific time. We came here at this crux, at this transition point. So we each of us have the potential of being extremely powerful beings in the way we express ourselves. And we tend to forget that we're creator beings. We've been given license to create from the grand creator himself. And so we have this ability to manifest things, and that's part of what I also talk quite deeply about, John. We don't have time to get into the details of it here, but that's something that I find very, very interesting. And I always try to reiterate for people that yes, indeed, we can't be waiting, we can't be hoping, we can't be, we just got to get active. We got to start doing, and we got to start knowing, first of all, that we're here for a reason, that we're going to make things happen. And we have to know that that new world is going to be manifested, and it can only be done when we visualize it, when we actively participate in it. It won't happen all on its own. So this is just, I just feel like it's my particular small role to trigger, to give people information, maybe to push a few buttons. I definitely do that every now and then. So yeah.
Well, building a picture of what this new world might be is very important, it seems to me, and that's a place where I hope that you and I get a chance to work together some in the future. But in the near future, you're going to be with us in December. It's the 8th, I believe it is. Is that correct?
Wait,
I
I think it might be the 9th, actually.
Maybe it's a Saturday.
It's going to be the Saturday, December 9th. I'm going to be on the East Coast of the United States. My first time ever on the East Coast speaking live. I'm totally psyched.
You're going to be in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, which is one of the prettiest little resort towns in the Appalachian Mountains, and we'll have a really good time. And our viewers can find out all about that on transitiontalks.org, and you can find out more about the Arlington Institute, where we produce all these interesting things, at arlingtoninstitute.org. And if you find this helpful, and if you found this little discussion interesting, then you got to do the thing. You got to punch this thing and say, I like this and I want to subscribe, because if you don't subscribe, you don't get a notice. And if you don't share it, then nobody else finds out about it. And so we need to kind of get the word out on all of this kind of stuff. And so please do your part and send this around. And Frank, it's nice to have you with us so much. And we are very much looking forward to having you on the 9th of December. Thank you, my friend.
I'm very much looking forward to being there in person and meeting you in person, John. Thank you so much for inviting me. Really look forward to it.